So for scones you need 8 ounces of self-raising flour, and I sieve that because in fact if you sieve it it'll be lighter, and you've got to add baking powder. If you add a little baking powder with scones, it does make them rise just a little bit more. So you add baking powder as well as self-raising flour. So 8 ounces of self-raising flour, a teaspoonful of baking powder, little salt, pinch of salt, with sweet ones and with savoury ones. I'm not a great one for sieving, but if you're using baking powder, it is a good idea just to do that. Then the fat, this can be either margarine or butter, about 2 ounces, and it wants to be softened. As you saw me wallop that in, it's rather soft and it's much easier to rub it in. Then rub it in, and with pastry, when I was taught to make pastry and scones, I was always told that you ought to have cool hands, but in fact I don't really find that that makes an awful lot of difference, because I find it's adding the ingredients in the right proportion and then making sure that you add the right amount of liquid. So rub it in. Now you can do this with a mixing machine if you prefer, and you can use, if you wish, brown flour. Particularly if it's savoury scones, you can use brown flour, but you will have to add more baking powder because brown flour, whole wheat flour, has no raising agent, so you'll need 3 teaspoonfuls of baking powder. There we are. Now that really does look like breadcrumbs, sort of white breadcrumbs, nice and light. Then to the other ingredients. Just wipe my hands at this stage. There we are. An egg and some sugar. As these are sweet scones, I'm adding about an ounce, that's a tablespoonful of sugar, and then to the liquid 1 egg. And this makes rather a cakey type of scone, which I think is rather nicer. 1 egg, and then beat that, blend it well together, just so that it will run through the fork. It doesn't yet. There we are. And then make it up to a 1/4 of a pint, that's 5 fluid ounces, slightly over rather than under. Now remember that this in fact has froth on the top, so that you've got to do it to below the froth. So I'm going to bend down and see it right to the, there we are. And I've done it slightly over because I'm going to glaze the top of the scones, and it's a good idea to leave some in the bottom of the jug. So put in the liquid, leaving a little in the bottom, and then mix it either with a fork or you can mix it with a knife. Now you can see that is rather soft. I think I've been just a little too generous with the liquid, and don't worry if you are, just sprinkle a little bit more flour in. It's much better to be too generous than not generous enough. There we are. And then take your hand and flour it well, flour the board. I could use a dredger, but I haven't got one. And then flour the hand well, and then work the mixture round the outside, getting all the bits in. There we are. And then put it on the bowl, on the board. Then any little pieces that you've got left, rub off your fingers, and now you can see, let me just move these things backwards. You can see that this is a very soft dough. Can you see? And I think that's perhaps where Mary went wrong, was that it was just a little bit too dry. Just needed a little. At school, I think we're taught often to handle it too much, and also I had Annabelle here the other day and she loves handling things. This is an occasion when really it's not a good idea to handle it too much. A little more flour on the board, press it down, and then a rolling pin. So flour on the board, flour on your hands, and flour on the rolling pin, but not any more added to the mixture. Roll it out to about 1/2 inch. There we are. And then cut it out. It used to be always use a fluted cutter for sweet things, and then put them on a greased tray, Now you can see they really are nice and soft. They rise much better, and I'm putting them absolutely touching each other. This amount of mixture makes about 9 to 10. Whoops, that one toppled right over. There we are. So how are we doing? That's 3, 6, 7, 8. Just knead in the other bit of mixture, but no more kneading than is necessary. Flour underneath, not on top. Then flatten it out, and really, if you haven't got a rolling pin, you can always use a milk bottle or your hand. Seems to do quite nicely. There we are. I wonder if I'm going to get out the right amount. Let's try. There. That's made a few more, hasn't it? That's 12. Depends really on the size that you make them. Then that last one, I'm just going to put that on. It's a little bit bigger, and I could just cut over the top like that. That would make a different one. And if you haven't got a cutter, you can always use a glass to cut out. So don't worry if you haven't got exactly the right thing. Use a glass or something the right shape. Then, so she's looking for the milk. There we are. The little bit that was left. Over the top, a little egg and milk. Now I've made those touch. If you let them touch, you'll find that when they rise, they don't topple over. They topple into each other, and also it keeps them nice and moist. And you want to bake these in a hot oven for about 10 minutes, something like that. So there we are, on a greased tray, 425 degrees Fahrenheit, gas number 7, on the top shelf. Leave them for about 10 minutes, maybe a little longer, maybe a little less. Keep an eye on them.